at Rise, dedicated to bringing the tech adoption and growth tactics from the startup world into classrooms. Before joining Rise, Logan spent 9 years working as a growth expert for over 250 early-stage startups, including Y Combinator, 500 startups, and Techstars alum. He's on the ground with startups in over 20 countries. You heard 20 countries, you heard that right. With extensive work including tech and education to help build emerging startup communities. Logan is also an innovation fellow at the University of Notre Dame, helping teach go-to-market skills to student entrepreneurs. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up at this time for Logan Herzog!
Hi everybody, thanks for having me. I want to start with kind of a weird picture. This is an old living room of mine. This is where I lived about 5 or 6 years ago in San Jose, Costa Rica. Oh yeah, okay, someone goes through here, cool. So, apologies that you don't see much of this room. Most of my pictures are very messy, I have 2 little kids. What's not in the picture is actually what I want to start with. The year is 2020, it's April 2020. I had moved to Costa Rica with my family to run sales for a company that sold recruiting software to companies all around Latin America. It's a cool job, but COVID was coming through, and I decided to start doing a little bit of a side hustle just in case, working with other companies, helping with sales development, and a number of other things that I'll get into later. Well, we decided not to take the last flight out of Costa Rica when the pandemic happened. We decided we were going to ride it out local. And then 3 weeks later, my role was eliminated because no one was hiring anymore in Latin America. Thankfully, I had that side hustle, and it was making at that time just about as much money as I was making in my salary. And so we were like, okay. But needless to say, things got real fast. No way to get home. I could only work remotely. I had no idea what was going to happen in the economy. And so, for one of the first times in my life, my entrepreneurship journey was do or die is a strong word, but that's what it felt like to me. Back was certainly against the wall, and felt like if I messed it up, man, I would need a lot of trouble. So, there was one big issue though. I was already at capacity, meaning I was already working all the hours I could work, and I couldn't take on more clients. There was one major roadblock that I was experiencing, and that's why I have the picture here. I needed contact data to reach out to prospects that I could sell to. But I didn't know how to get that data. I had found a random little script that you could run in Google Sheets, like a little extension. I'm not a coder, so I found this online, and it would give me, after 2 hours of processing, about 50 contacts, which is what I would need to send at least in a day for each client that I work with. I didn't have time to do that during the day. As a new entrepreneur, I didn't really have a lot of time for anything, let alone spending hours and hours finding contact info so I could go prospect people. This tool had to be done, I had to use it at night. So the reason I have my living room picture up here is because out of frame, there's a bed next to a desk where I have my laptop. And because I wanted to stay married, I decided not to sleep in my wife's same bed because I needed to set an alarm every couple hours that would wake me up, and I would go and click a button and process another 50 contacts. Now, maybe to some of you that sounds kind of, I don't know, quaint or a typical part of the startup journey, but for me it was really frustrating because maybe a month or 2 later I found out that there was tools that cost less than $150 a month that would do all of this in about 30 seconds. And I was wasting my entire night, every night, partially out of desperation and being in survival mode to get the contact data that I needed. It was right then when I decided to set a personal mission of mine in my career. I wanted every entrepreneur possible to understand what tools were available to them. I wanted them to learn how to use it as early as possible, because it quite literally helped me provide for my family. And I think many entrepreneurs face that back against the wall moment, but don't have the luxury of walking into or stumbling across the tools that can help them, or they don't know where to look. Many entrepreneurs face similar obstacles that have nothing to do with contact data. That was very specific to my business. I've also experienced moments where I spent way too much time trying to figure out what entity to use to create my business, which really, if you've done it, you realize it's not that big a deal. A little bit of expertise can go a long way. I spent weeks laboring over what my company culture should be when I didn't even have a paying customer yet. There's so many things that I wasted so much time on because I wasn't doing it in the right order, and I simply didn't know. So again, that motivated me really deeply to support entrepreneurs everywhere I went. Eventually, when I decided to move back to the States with a couple kids and a lot of suitcases, I wanted to find a way in my new home to help as many founders as possible avoid the pains that I felt and be able to relate to them on that level and knowing that intense moment. So at first I thought, well, I'm going to have to teach people all these complex platforms that you use in the tech world. And that was pretty labor intensive. And it didn't work for every entrepreneur. It was really hard to meet entrepreneurs where they're at when I had to kind of force certain tech upon them because I thought that I could help them grow their business. At this time, AI was really coming into the picture. This was about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago. So AI is really coming in, stepping in as what we all are recognizing it as today. And I started to wonder how it could help me help entrepreneurs. Beyond just the typical use cases that we experience, like writing social media posts and maybe cleaning up a spreadsheet here or there. To me, I realized that it could be a massive way, a way to level the playing field for entrepreneurs and recognize that there's a new way to access the same resources that have always been there, but in a more efficient way. I started working with Rise, and with our team, we started thinking through how can we use AI as an interface to tap into these resources. Today, I'm going to share a couple different ways that we're experimenting with and seeing to support other entrepreneurs in their journey with AI as the in-between. Some of you are entrepreneurs, some of you actively work in this space where you're supporting entrepreneurs. Some of you might just be interested in technology in general. What I hope is that this kicks off a collaborative, kind of macro conversation in our communities, but that it also is very specific, meaning that it's easy for us to take action. So I hope this is the beginning of many speeches like this, where we talk about what are the actual use cases in our community as we try and help founders get to revenue faster. You'll also notice, because my background as a growth hacker, I'm going to spend a lot of my time talking about revenue as a key outcome. There are a number of ways we can apply this technology. We can use this to solve financial literacy issues. We can use this to help with operational questions, all kinds of things. I'm going to point a lot of my comments towards revenue and lead generation as one of the most, in my opinion, crucial things to get right early on if we want more founders to make it through those early days. What I'd like everybody to do, though, if you have a cell phone, pull it out and scan this QR code. This is how you're going to submit questions. And at the end of the session, I would love to answer as many questions as possible, so I anticipate several. We all have questions about AI. Some of us are cautious. Throw me in that bag. I'm also cautious about how we deploy this. Many of us are also optimistic and excited. I would love to hear what you have to say and see if I can share any additional comments there. So please, as you listen, feel free to submit. I do think you only get one shot at submitting though. So, sorry, try and hold it for the optimal time. But I'm going to share four ways that we think about, four ways that we see AI as an ideal layer, as an ideal resource for entrepreneurs as they start. And then later I'll talk about some of the implications that I think that will result, as well as what we can do as those who support entrepreneurs to get these resources out in everybody's hands as easily as possible. Okay, so the first one is simply, it can help get stuff done faster. And I'm going to refer a little bit to just basic ChatGPT usage to start. For people like Dara, our software engineer, and I, who work on this stuff all the time, ChatGPT can be a little boring. If you've not seen ChatGPT, this is what it looks like. It's essentially a chatbot that lets you query the internet's knowledge, right? That is a very, any AI experts here will probably scoff at that basic of a description. There's a number of ways to describe what's happening here, but it allows us to access information on the internet very quickly, and in an interface that is relatively easy, a way that we're conversing with something, right? What it's really doing at this basic level just helping people get tedious tasks done faster, and starting here is critical. There's a number of off-the-shelf products, there's a number of tactics that we can use to leverage AI, but we've learned as we train people on it, that the best way to start is to use GPT or other similar interfaces because you understand how to get what you want out of the platform. So everything that we do starts there with the basics, with the core components of things like, how do I write a good prompt? How do I ask questions or give feedback to the results that I got? So that way I can manipulate and get the exact result over time. So this is meant to be a conversational process. I personally use this to find how-to articles often, especially when I'm trying to launch a business. It's hard to know exactly what to search for, and so driving people towards an interface like GPT where they can say, I need to figure this out in their own words, without necessarily any sort of foundational expertise, AI can help them identify the resources they need. Now, there are risks here. Obviously, we don't want to 100% trust an imperfect model, and any model that we use with AI is going to be imperfect. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how we can use community and person-to-person interactions to vet out the information we get and actually grow the human connection that we want to achieve in our entrepreneurship communities while still leveraging technology. But again, everything has to start with basic GPT usage. Another way that we see AI being leveraged and that we're personally driving a lot towards as an organization is creating sounding boards. There are some topics that I take for granted as an entrepreneur now. Things that I have been trained on over years, frameworks, I'll demonstrate one here in a minute, that have helped me a lot, that have kind of become sort of a core foundation of how I approach business decisions. Because I take it for granted, it can be hard to understand just how helpful they are early in the journey, especially if you're out on an island, which many entrepreneurs feel like they are. It's easy to not know what you don't know. It's easy to feel maybe dumb or embarrassed if you don't know the lingo. And sometimes we need a better environment to introduce these subjects to people in a way that allows them to kind of go at their own pace and explore on their own and come to their own conclusions about how to use these frameworks. For example, we've all heard perhaps of the concept of ikigai, this Japanese concept, or we borrowed it from Japanese culture to help us identify what the world wants, what we're good at, what we can get paid for, and use that as a guide to get us to our, like a more purposeful and authentic entrepreneurship journey. That's something that I take for granted because I learned it early on. In my days in school, I was introduced to this concept, and it's something that I default back to often. But if you've never been exposed to this, it can be novel, and it's really helpful. It's also sometimes hard to explore in the typical environments where you find it. Let's say that you learn this in a class, but you have a hard time being vulnerable and opening up about what your own goals are. Maybe you've never really felt permission to pursue exactly what you wanted instead of what other influences in your life wanted for you. There's a lot of reasons why conversations like this can actually be really hard to have person to person. What I'm not saying is that we use AI as like a social source. We don't replace the human element. But there are certain concepts that are easy to surface in a one-on-one or maybe a more private scenario where someone can interact with a GPT. Now there's another crucial component here, which is that we're constantly training people that you don't take the results from AI as a be-all, end-all. You're constantly vetting them out. And so these kinds of sounding boards are constructed with a very specific goal. It is not to give a clear roadmap. It is not to provide hyper-specific answers to high-level, very personal questions. The goal is to provoke thought. It's to expose ideas, it's to introduce frameworks, and allow someone to experiment and kind of poke and prod in a healthy and authentic way to get introduced, and maybe to do a little bit of introspection, right? I've had very powerful moments talking with mentors in this way, where I've been introduced to these things and have been asked very thought-provoking questions that drove me inward, which is crucial early on. Even if we have that luxury, or we don't, I think there's a lot of potential for sounding boards. Think of what would happen if everybody had access to be exposed to different frameworks around financial planning. Or we have one that talks about, that guides you through the process of deciding what kinds of business models would be ideal for the lifestyle you're trying to build. Right? Do I build a business that's capital intensive because I want to have an exit someday and I'm willing to put in that effort and I'm willing to take on that risk? Or maybe I need more of a lifestyle business that pays me well as I generate cash flow and I kind of consolidate and generate more assets that I might be able to use in a bigger way. Maybe I don't even really have permission to believe. Maybe I don't have entrepreneurs in my family. Maybe I don't have anybody around me who has achieved what I would consider success. Maybe you're not surrounded by a lot of people who are thriving. Maybe there's some toxicity in your family life. There's a number of reasons why you can feel like you're on the outside looking in around successful entrepreneurs, and exposing people to these kinds of frameworks and ability to tap into the world's knowledge this way through sounding boards is great, as long as we keep them high level and we don't remove the responsibility of the user to contextualize and use this information to make their own decision, not handing the reins over to an AI model. That is not the outcome we want. Something that I'm really excited about is the ability to get subject matter expertise into the hands of entrepreneurs exactly when they need it. Again, if somebody could have just told me, hey dude, there's like kind of cheap tools you can use and you'll get to sleep a lot better at night, you don't have to have a messy bed in your living room, my life would have been different real fast. I often joke with my wife about how much money, I've calculated at times how much money I've lost just not knowing about tools. And I don't regret it as part of the process, right? If we, part of being an entrepreneur is being willing to take action without a whole lot of knowledge. And that leads to making decisions like the one I did, where I identified the wrong tool and it took 8 hours instead of 30 seconds. But if somebody was there at my side, helping me, understood what I needed and could deploy that knowledge to me right when I needed it, obviously, I would have benefited financially, mentally, you name it, right? So the idea is that how can we get the world's top subject matter experts on everything you need to know as an entrepreneur into their hands at that right moment? I'm going to use one very niche example. Excuse me. I'm going to, after I figured out those tools, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later. I ended up starting a business, an agency around sales development. And it allowed me to start a career path where I worked with hundreds of startups. I, over the next several years, sent around, not a joke, 45 million emails. At varying levels of personalization for different purposes, but I have just like a really random amount of knowledge about what a good email is right now, right? That information will change very quickly, it already is changing. But how can I, as an individual, get that information in the hands of somebody who needs to start prospecting today? That's not easy. When I first moved here, I volunteered a ton of time teaching courses, meeting one-on-one with entrepreneurs, just trying to distill this knowledge, but I just felt like I could never move quickly enough, and it was never efficient enough to actually make the impact that I wanted. AI can be a bridge that allows somebody with very limited baseline knowledge about a subject to interact with the base knowledge of an expert on what they need and get real tactical help right at the right moment. So for example, a very simple version of this is, how do I write a good email with very limited input? If I'm somebody who showed up to a morning class at 7:45 for entrepreneurship, I'm a little tired, I don't have a lot of insights right now, I can describe my business on a high level and who I want to sell to, how do I get a workable email template that I know will perform reasonably well? It's actually quite simple to do that with something like AI. We have bots that are programmed off of articles that I've written, templates that I've used, and then Dara, our master software engineer, builds all the code and the rule sets to ensure that the bot follows those rules in a consistent manner. This is not 100% there, but it gets you 85 to 90% there, where it's a pretty workable template in seconds, not hours of training. This is a very simple use case. I think we can all imagine if we applied this to a number of different subject matter areas around finance, around marketing, around hiring, around corporate structure, a number of things, we can point people in the right directions and get them those resources they need. It would probably take me a couple hours to get somebody who's already pretty comfortable copywriting to write a good cold email. Here, I can get somebody a workable template in a few minutes. I think that's groundbreaking for people who need to move quickly and just experiment. Third, and perhaps the area that I'm most excited about, is that AI allows us to talk to software without having any knowledge about that software platform. So let's go back to my use case around data. I knew nothing when I was laying on my living room bed, not couch. When I was laying on my bed in my living room, I knew nothing about scraping the web, making sure I had like compliant data sources. I just knew I needed to find emails of people who could buy my product. That's literally all I knew, right? I was quickly introduced to a bunch of different tools, and I'm not advocating for these tools. There's so many different versions and competitors. Just sharing a few examples that could help me along the way that I gradually got introduced to. All of these tools have an API, which means that it can talk to another platform automatically. And what we realized is that with AI, we could actually use the APIs of this platform and talk with it. So for example, instead of me having to know how to navigate Apollo.io and build all these filters and know exactly the right way to kind of phrase the keywords that I was searching for people, we can chat to a bot and tell them high level what we need, who we're trying to reach, and they can speak to the platforms for us and get that information. So imagine if you're able to provide to an entrepreneur, hey, I know you need contact info, and historically I had to train you on a bunch of this stuff. All you need to do is talk to this bot, and it's going to provide the contact info you need with a very specific persona, and we can fill in the gaps on platform knowledge later. What I'm not saying is that we don't need to understand software to grow successful businesses. It's not the message here at all. What I'm saying is anybody who started a business from scratch probably knows that you have to be good enough to get exactly what you need, but you're very limited in time. So if you can get the exact amount of knowledge or value out of a piece of software to get to say your first 100K in revenue, I don't really think you need to be an expert on any of these platforms from a moral perspective. It's kind of the conversation with a calculator. At what point do you need to understand how to do this problem by hand versus knowing what tool to use to get the output that you need? So in the context of how we support entrepreneurs with this, imagine a world where we could provide every new business owner access to some of the world's most powerful software tools that I use to grow venture-backed startups without any knowledge of how they function, but you can get exactly the value that you need out of it. We see potential to do this with other tools around social media. Can you build a bot that talks with you about a certain concept, what you think about it, and automatically have it sent to go get scheduled without having to teach somebody how to use Hootsuite or Sprout Social right now on the spot? I'm gonna call any sort of social scheduling platform. Imagine if you could talk to your data around finance. It opens up a whole other set of concerns around compliance and security, but the technology exists where we could do that here. So instead of having to learn all these platforms when I'm just trying to get enough revenue to actually work on my business, I could be getting what I need out of it just through natural language, talking the way I would to you or how I would type. This to me removes the need for someone like me to think about educating about platforms as the first step. What it really does is it allows me to just enable people to sell their product, ensure that the market helps them tweak that product so that they can scale, and we'll make sure that they have the right platform knowledge as they need it. But until now, you've been required to essentially learn all of these from top to bottom. For example, I've trained people on this. Anybody here, I'm not sure if any of my Notre Dame students are in here, but I've helped a number of intern groups and a couple of cohorts in my classes to learn this stuff. It takes a lot of time. And these are generally students who are very comfortable with technology, pretty comfortable with copywriting. It's a lot of work to get somebody up and running. You need to not just understand copywriting, you need to know how to navigate platforms. You need to know the dynamics at different levels of seniority in a company before you prospect that. This is all just to send cold emails. That's not the majority of what you should be spending your time on in your business. But it's so much training to get somebody up to competence. And we need to question how much competence do they actually need if AI can be an intermediary and help them sell faster, rather than focusing on developing platform knowledge. With AI, you can have contact data to send and a basic template in 5 to 10 minutes. And that's including group discussion time. We've done it time and time again in our classes. We've done it with adults, we've done it with high schoolers. Anybody who can engage with, I'm not even sure if there's a grade level I would put it at, but let's say 8th grade reading level can engage with the bots that we're creating and get the information they need. They have a basic knowledge of what they're selling, who they want to sell it to, and maybe some geographic parameters to help the bots function a little more properly. So someone could sit down and exercise with us and use, without using, some of the best software in the world and have really high quality help with things like email copywriting in a matter of minutes. What could change in our entrepreneurship ecosystems if entrepreneurs could move that quickly, that early? Personal experience, it would have probably, I'm not being hyperbolic when I say, I probably would have made multiple 6 figures of revenue much faster earlier in my life. That's how much money I left on the table, which, I don't know about you, to me, that is a lot of money. And when I think about the trajectory that could have changed, it's very powerful. So what can we do? Talking a lot about the capabilities and the ways we're seeing it be used and how we're trying to use it in our own organization. But what can we do as leaders in the entrepreneurship ecosystem space to make sure that people get access to these resources? First, spread awareness. 2 words that I actually really hate, but I think is necessary here. Spread awareness, I think, is usually kind of like a catch-all for we just need to talk about this more, we need another meeting. It's kind of a way to kick the can down the road. What I mean here, though, when I say spread awareness is we need to be educated on specific use cases for our community. So what problems are preventing founders from getting into revenue or doing X, Y, Z faster? And understanding the power of AI and what it can connect to and what things can be done easier with it allows us to come up with hyperlocal solutions to problems. So we don't just need to spread awareness, we need to start having the conversations that lead to action around the most specific things we need. I'll say the same about problems, not just use cases, but ensuring that we're actually approaching this from a, what's going on in our county? Previously, that would be really hard to justify, right? Obviously, you have a high-level view, but tactically, it's hard enough to find experts who have worked regionally and far and wide who have strong opinions. Finding the people who know what's going on in their neighborhood, what works there. Imagine what would change if we had those kinds of problems and use cases lined out, and we're able to use AI to address them. The more I believe that while we're thinking in the tech world, and rightly so, about how AI can help us scale so much faster, I'm super interested in how AI can also help us think small. What kinds of problems in a micro area can be solved because we're so much more efficient with our time, and we're wasting far less time on unnecessary steps. So spreading awareness about specific problems, use cases that are locally focused, I think is an important next step for anybody whose job it is to support entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who want to advocate for themselves and their peers. Next, we need to find homes for these resources. That's a really complex conversation, and candidly, I'm still pretty new to the ecosystem development world. I've always approached it as either a founder or a member of a growth team. This is one of my first opportunities to actually work on the other side of the table. I'm realizing that this is not easy. We need to find places where people can easily tap into this. A few thoughts that we have in our org are, obviously there's going to be large institutions who can sponsor these kinds of resources where entrepreneurs are already going. Your economic development hubs, your small business development centers, your co-working spaces. Those are great. What we're also recognizing, though, is because it's so much more efficient to build these, that these homes can actually be a much smaller scale. Maybe there's a church that has a program to help with financial independence, and entrepreneurship is a part of that. Because it's easy to spin these, well, relatively easy to spin these resources out, it allows us to think in smaller scale about where they can live. How can we make sure that if there's a centralized place to access this, we can create a hub and spoke model, where we can reach out to other communities that might not be participating or have as good of access. We ourselves are experimenting here in South Bend with that. There's a number of different micro communities who want to build very specific hubs around these resources. We're finding that that's a useful model, and we hope that other groups take that same approach. How can we get out in as many places as possible, while also centralizing enough to combine efforts and move things forward as a region. It's critical the on-ramps are simple. We need to house these resources in places where entrepreneurs frequently go and where they already are getting value. We want to avoid duplicated efforts as much as possible. Industry specific is also something that I want to touch on a second time. We're finding that the use cases are slightly different between each group, and there's a lot of power in being surrounded by people, peers that are facing the exact same issues as you are, and working together to solve that goal. So as we get specific and help people access these resources in the context of their industry and their geographic community, it's pretty magical. There's a lot of great support and people move forward so much quicker. Including community, like physical proximity, is so essential. I'm not an expert on the ethics or the future of AI. I am a humble growth hacker who wants to use this to let other people growth hack much faster, right? However, I think that the human component is something that will prevent us from losing kind of the war of balance here. So for example, if you're in a group like the classes that I've taught in the past, there's people from all walks of life in that room. So when you get an output from AI, maybe there's a template that you're using, maybe there's some insight you got about Ikigai, and you share it with your group, you're going to have a number of different people challenging it from different perspectives. I think that is healthy, especially as we're worried about whether or not the data that's used to train these models is diverse enough to represent our actual communities. So we have to filter it, and I think that's a natural and kind of beautiful way to do so. We can do it in physical proximity with each other, talking with the group about what the outputs are and how we can improve it. Creates a natural QA, not Q&A, a natural QA, quality assurance. So someone can kind of call BS on something that's like, that's not right, or that's inaccurate, or that sounds corny. We have an activity where when our students generate email templates, they say it out loud to their peers. People will be like, that sounded weird, we should tweak that. And when they do, it often writes much better. So it creates a quality control layer that we're all worried about. Well, what happens if you use something with AI and it's inaccurate? It's much less likely that that happens if you voice that to your peers in a group setting. It also creates accountability, helping ensure that we're using AI for the right reasons, that we're questioning when things don't seem right, that we are doing things ethically, meaning we're not trying to use it to steal someone's IP or present someone else's work as our own. Doing this in groups and accessing these resources around other humans is really powerful. I think it can help us combat a lot of the things that we're all probably a little nervous about as this technology starts to take more of a hold. I would argue that we won't really reach our full potential with AI, especially as entrepreneurs, if it isolates us and if we lean into the remote nature of it. This needs to be accessed together so we can build each other up. Next, and one of the more tricky ones is we need to incentivize experts to share their knowledge in a way that's easily accessible. It's not easy, right? You're going to ask somebody to kind of take potentially very economically valuable information and distribute it via AI. That's quite a task. What I can vouch for, at least in the growth community, and I've seen it in others, that there are a lot of people who want to share their knowledge. It's just often tedious, it's not very scalable, and it's a lot of work to share. Even it's the 5-minute conversations that you have over and over and over again on the same principle that are tough. And you want to be able to have that more efficiently. I'm not sure if these two people are in the room. I might embarrass a couple people. But there's two people that I really look up to as individuals who are very good at this. One of them's my boss. I'm not even sure she's in the room, so this doesn't count as she wouldn't. Right? She wouldn't accept it anyway. But I'm going to start with Iris. Iris Hamill is our executive director. And she's always she's exceptional not just at identifying and retaining information about experts and how to activate them and get them involved to support, but she lets you roam free. She doesn't put too many parameters around it. Right? She's very open-minded and loves to move fast. So for me, someone who wants to distribute my knowledge about growing a business really quickly, working with someone like Iris who can balance institutional stuff. She can go be on boards at universities, but she can also talk startup with me. Gives me a lot of confidence and desire to share more. And so I think that she is a great example of that. John Henry, a good friend of mine at Notre Dame, I remember when we first met, his first question was, how can we get value for you out of this? And how to make it as easy as possible for you to help? Which is not questions that I get very often. I told him, I struggle to document my own stuff. I know a lot of things, I can talk about it. It's hard for me to write it all down. And so he gave me like an army of interns in Notre Dame who were benefiting because they were extracting my knowledge and sharing it with their interns. But they also gave me documentation all the time that I can go use in my own business efforts. It was great. I thought it was very mutually beneficial. So obviously grown, I now work in the ecosystem. And I think a lot about how, as we go forward and we want to democratize knowledge, we have to incentivize those who have the knowledge to want to work with us. It starts with making it easy and finding mutual beneficial connections. It probably ends with some sort of economic deal to compensate people for their time. I don't know that I have a perfect answer for that yet, but that's something that we as communities will have to figure out. How can we provide the right economic and intrinsic, maybe altruistic motivations of the smartest people in our area to make their information and common knowledge available to everybody in the moment that they need it. Let's talk some implications, things that I get really excited about. Obviously, as a growth hacker, I view this as a way to get people to revenue so much faster. In fact, I believe that you can get to 100K in revenue now, in theory, without any knowledge of the platforms that I share. If you're just ready to show up and sell to the leads that are generated, that you were able to generate using the AI-driven resources you have, I don't believe you need to know much about running marketing platforms or CRMs or social scheduling. I think a lot of entrepreneurs resonate with that. They want to sell. They want to get out on the street and build their product. What they don't want to do is get buried in tools and training. That conversation becomes very different when you have enough money to start hiring a staff and really reinvesting back into the business. But I believe that starting point, whether it's 100K or 50K, we can debate that all day. I think that people can get into revenue without any real platform knowledge. That to me is groundbreaking. I think it allows us to be really differentiated locally. We all have very unique combinations of industry and history and dynamics that I think create their own unique ecosystem. I've worked in 20 different countries. I've seen it all over. Everybody wants to be differentiated, but it's hard. It's hard to consolidate that knowledge and make it actionable. But what if we all kind of had a secret sauce in South Bend where we knew how things worked and we had bots that could point us in the right direction to grow in a way that was optimal for the city that we're in? Imagine the kind of employers we could attract if our talent was highly trained on the local dynamics because they could access that information through AI. I think there's so many ways that individual markets and even neighborhoods can differentiate themselves economically using these kinds of resources. I've touched on this a few times, but I think there's potential for a wave of hyper-local businesses. Businesses that are not thinking about total addressable market in the billions. What if you could build a business that nets a couple $100,000 a year with a 3-mile radius? To me, that might sound ambitious, but I think between the reduction in startup costs that this kind of technology will create, the speed that you can move at because you don't have to learn certain platforms, at the beginning at least, and the ability to run businesses very lean can create a whole other class of startup that I'm personally very excited about. I say a whole other class. This is really how business has been being done forever, and we're just tapping back into it, and it's a full circle moment. But I think it changes what is viewed as a real startup, which is something that's near and dear to my heart. Something that allows somebody to earn anywhere close to 6 figures doing what they love right now, and it's directly impacting their community, it allows them to focus on their community, to me seems incredible. I would love to see more of those built, and we're personally as an organization trying really hard to support that new era of entrepreneur. I want to talk about how my life changed after living room. It took me many months to master the tools that I discovered. It was a lot of trial and error. I brought in a partner. We hired about 12 people, launched way more businesses that are on that slide. Those are the businesses that actually survived, made a good amount of revenue. But what happened was we were able to get customers within days and weeks of generating an idea, not months or years. We were able to move so quickly, and as a result, we're able to contribute, in my opinion, at a really high level to the community where we lived at the time, and have developed as a result many spin-off businesses that a lot of these employees you see on the screen have gone on to run. When I moved back to the States, I then had the experience to go help. It was interesting how as soon as I no longer was in survival mode, it was so much easier for me to want to give back. When you get a really painful thing off your shoulders, you want everybody to experience that, right? So for me, I think the future that I foresee here is cities that have so many more thriving entrepreneurs with a strong desire to reinvest and contribute back. How do we get people to that point as fast as possible? It's something that I'm personally very excited to continue to explore, and I hope that we, as individual communities, can address this and figure it out. Thank you so much. We're going to do some time for Q&A now, but I appreciate your time and listening to my thoughts here. Okay, Dara is my Q&A man, our software engineer.
Thank you so much, Logan, for sharing all of that. I have learned a lot. I think everyone here would have learned one or two things too. I have some questions for you here. Let me know if you're ready to go.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's hope he doesn't put me on the spot too much.
So you talk about revenue a lot of times here, and someone is curious enough to ask why you keep talking about revenue.
Why do I talk about revenue? Okay, this is I don't expect everybody to agree with me on this. And there's so many different opinions, and there's so many ways to win. So let me just start there. I think that there are so many different ways to win in entrepreneurship. I personally think that a lot of times we conflate like entrepreneurship with the venture capital model, where you come from an idea that is super, super ambitious, you need to build it gradually before you even go to market, and you need to raise money, and then you need to go see if people will buy it. And I'm oversimplifying that process. I have benefited greatly from that world. A lot of the money that I've made in my life is from that industry. But I think that it becomes a problem in many local communities that I've seen, whether it's in Cambodia or it's in South Bend, Indiana. There are times when I wonder, man, you could just be selling and making money, and you probably would have done more than you would have raised if you spent the last 2 years just going to market. Now, with big tech, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I would never say that to somebody who's building technology for the Department of Defense. But if your goal is to build a killer mulching business, or even something more of a local software, I think that revenue should be the focus. I also think that it supports people who don't have anywhere else but the startup culture to go for their entrepreneurship resources. If I want to start a landscaping business and the local entrepreneurship ecosystem is primarily focused on tech, I'm going to feel like I don't really have a real business sometimes. Or I'm not going to be able to relate to that model. And so I think as we focus more on revenue, we're going to have better tech companies, candidly, because so many of the tech companies that I worked with over the last 10 years have failed because they didn't focus enough on revenue, and it was highly speculative. And make sure that that model is applied only to the businesses that make the most sense, and make sure that we start glorifying selling and making money. It's not that it's a be-all, end-all, but I think it's empowering when it's like, it's okay to go after a market of 2 or 3 million people and hire a couple of great people and make $100,000 a year. That is a wonderful outcome for the vast majority of people. We should celebrate that just as much as the attempt to go after the billionaires. What I want to be careful of, though, is that we never stifle anybody. Anyone who wants to be ambitious, there's a 12-year-old who wants to go build a big tech company, we should make sure they have all the resources at their disposal to go chase that. I might argue that a couple small businesses along the way could prep them, but we want to make sure that we avoid talking down or killing dreams. I just think we need to be more inclusive and address the businesses that really build a lot of our downtowns and our cities, which are not going to be venture-backed. I think that they're critical and they're so fun to work on. So that's why I think about revenue. It does not mean that I'm always right, but it's where I'm going to default. And as fellow community members, I hope you keep me honest when that's not the right approach. Thanks, Dara.
Thank you for that.
You got that one?
Mm-hmm. So every time we talk about AI, people talk about ethics, security, and everyone is kind of curious to know, how do we keep things secure?
I don't have a perfect answer right now. there are probably people in this room who can answer this question 10 times better than me. What I'm going to do, Dara is actually included in that. Dara is absolutely more capable of answering that question. What I will say, I'll share what we're doing right now. It's particularly sensitive to us because there are times when we work with kids. There's times in which case sometimes we're just not able to use it, right? Whether it's for compliance or security. There's a few things that we're doing right now to try and just stay on track as this whole thing gets figured out. The first thing is, we're actually pretty careful about when we connect our bots to OpenAI or any other model provider. And I'm sorry I'm getting kind of specific. There'll be some people in this room who find this too basic, some people who might find this a little over their head. But there are times when we can build leveraging AI's capabilities, but in a way that does not send our information to the larger model. It allows us to, especially when we're dealing with younger people, make sure that that information is not being used to train models. It gives us an additional layer of security because it's built off of my articles, not off of AI. So we're very careful about what is powering our bots and what components of those models we're actually using. That's not a perfect answer, but it's the first place that we start. Does this actually need to be connected to the larger model, or can we build kind of an in-between version? Second is, we are using a lot of large providers and like kind of incumbent big platforms, which kind of kills me because I'm a startup guy. I love, finding the next tool, especially in growth. Like, those new tools are so fun. But a lot of those new tools don't last very long because candidly, OpenAI can be a little predatory and it tends to crush its competition, and that's going to be a whole other thing we'll observe over the next few years. But also, it's hard to trust the compliance and the security capabilities. So we try and lean on using larger companies when we're choosing software that are already compliant from a security perspective. The other thing too is we just regularly train on not sharing proprietary data, nor trying to generate proprietary information using AI, meaning, I usually just say it like this, a little bit less elegant. Dude, if someone can do that in 2 minutes, anybody can do that in 2 minutes. So is it really that valuable? Like, is that blog post that good if anybody could just go and do the same exact thing? Like, business is still about being differentiated. So if we get, I'll use the word lazy, that's probably too strong of a word, but if we get a little lazy as entrepreneurs and we give too much of the reins over, yeah, there's a question of like, will we be replaced? There's more existential things we can talk about. I'm more worried about like, that doesn't sound like good business. It doesn't sound like you're gonna be around very long because you're not actually differentiated. That's how we're approaching it. We're consulting with a number of people on the legal side in terms of what data can we share safely without issues around potential ownership. How much can we trust the terms and conditions? There's so many things here. We've decided as an org that the answer is not to not adopt it. It is to be as cautious as possible, but be at the forefront of how it can be used so we can advocate for good usage. Anybody here has thoughts on that? I would love to talk to you after this, because we want to make sure that we do this right. Dart?
Thank you so much, Logan, for answering that. Where do you see entrepreneur in the next 10 years with AI?
Entrepreneurship in the next 10 years with AI. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water. My mouth just got dry.
Go for it, go for it. No pressure.
I'm going to be a little redundant here, but I really want to hammer on the, up until this point, and maybe this is just me projecting my tech background, but like, you usually have to tackle a large enough market to justify the risk and cost to build a business. So if you're doing something particularly risky, if you're asking somebody to give you money about a technology that may or may not exist yet, and they're trusting you to build it, you better have a really high ceiling as a company, or it's not going to make sense to give you the money, right? That's why you have a lot of really like speculative tech products going out there, and I think they're good. I think it's a great ecosystem, again. However, I think that as it gets, in my opinion, ridiculously cheap to start a business, you in theory could start a business in a few hours. I've done it. We can talk about that another time. I've definitely actually done that and experimented with it. If the cost goes to the floor to start a business, and the cost to operate that business continues to go down, it means that you can solve smaller problems and still be profitable. So again, I think a lot, having been frustrated in other places about the limitations of the tech world to solve local markets. It's not like they're incapable of it. Often they contribute greatly and they pave the way. But tech alone can't save our cities and our local economies. So what happens when we can address smaller, more local problems in a way that could be maybe not as profitable as a software business, but respectable and good. I think there's so much in terms of what can be built and things that you can invest in at scale. That's really exciting to me. I think my utopia on this is a bunch of businesses that are extremely local but really tech forward and tech fluent that are solving problems of their neighbors, not just of the entire world. That's me being a little bit idealistic. It probably won't shake out exactly that way, but that's the future that I want to help with. I think we got time for a couple more, Dara.
Yeah.
You got a couple more?
Are there any local community for people who want to get started now? So like being, and if not, how do we start one?
I'll answer the second. I want you to answer the first one. Dara's in all the local communities. He's our expert. Dara, can you answer a couple of local communities that you enjoy? And we can post them on our Rise LinkedIn page or something. I'm looking at our marketing lead. We'll post it somewhere. But what are a couple that you like?
Well, I'm gonna say I don't know for sure if there are local community here in South Bend that you could like join. But I've explored joining meetups and community online. There is one that I use a lot, no code operations. So you can go on LinkedIn and search for it. No code ops, that's the name on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in AI, no code, it's really helpful. I'm one of the mentors, so you can ask me questions directly.
One thing I'll also say is that if you want to build something like that, right, our organization would love to talk with you and collaborate. If nothing else, just to know how you're going to build it, because we're trying to advocate for the right way to build this out. So if there's no code communities that spring up, that's a very interesting place to have, an interesting home for these resources in a way that's perhaps a bit more easy to distribute. So I hope you're able to find out there's no code ops, Dara, okay? And I would love to get an email from you if you are interested in building that. I just want to hear how you want to approach it and how we can be good members of the community there. You got a couple more?
Yeah. What do you have to say about some people who think this would make people lazy? Like for young folks trying to use AI, like ChatGPT, for example, since it can go online and pull information from it.
I think it totally will. I think it will make people kind of lazy. I just don't think that the businesses or those individuals will last very long. Because there's a lot of people already, as someone who Dara and I spend a ton of time thinking about this, and there are people who are light years ahead, countries away, who are just, you're always going to find somebody who just seems infinitely smarter than you. So the idea that you will be able to be simultaneously lazy using AI and then succeed, I'm quite skeptical of. Maybe I have too much faith in the market. I don't know. That's probably fair. I don't want us to talk about big corporations and stuff. That's a whole other conversation. I'm just talking about it as a new upstart entrepreneur. You can't afford to cut corners. I want you to view this as a way to accelerate and scale yourself, not as a way. I think it's dangerous to think about this as a way to get tasks off your plate. So it sort of delegates the responsibility. It's like, this stresses me out, I don't want to do it anymore. Instead, it's how can I do this really efficiently and well, leveraging an assistant that in theory kind of knows everything that's on the internet. Like that's a pretty powerful tool you can use. I'm going to go back to something I said earlier, which actually I don't know if I said it this way. We talk about using AI to organize, not originate. If you originate, again, anybody can originate as well. So what do I mean by that? It means if you want to create a blog post, simple use case, you could in theory put in 2 sentences and say, I want to create a blog post on how to think about financial literacy. And you'll get something. I don't know if it'll be any good. Some of us may have done that. I've done stuff like that. I'm not above that completely. But it's nothing compared to when I upload a transcript of a conversation I had with a colleague about this, and then say, organize this into a blog outline, or turn this into a blog, right? So if I can distill information using AI, that's powerful because it still comes from my brain, it still has my own opinion and thought. That's a much better starting point. So I think the lazy will lose for the most part. Although there's a whole conversation about like, is laziness always bad? Like it helps us avoid really annoying processes that probably shouldn't exist. So I think that kind of stuff will still happen. But I think if we just try and delegate our lives to AI from an entrepreneurship perspective, at least as it works right now, I don't have a lot of faith that you're going to succeed. And that's a strong stance.
Yeah, I think we can take just one more.
Yeah, one more.
I would just want you to recommend like 3 free AI tools that entrepreneurs can get started on.
Okay, I'm going to answer a different question, which is cheap tools. I think that this is so powerful that it's worth investing a little bit of money. And if you do not have the funds to do this, there's ways to get you those funds. So let's talk about that as well, right? I think that there's a lot of ways to get you access to these resources. ChatGPT, the paid version, absolutely. Dara and I still use it all the time. Hardcore pro users, I would highly encourage you to use that. You might have another model that you prefer if you're already doing this, cool, do it. But I would say pay for the highest level you can get to, so you can leverage it as much as possible. There's a huge, huge difference in the free version versus the paid. So I strongly recommend that. There's another tool that I recommend that costs as little as $10 a month called Make.com, if you're not familiar. Make.com allows you to, it allows you to automate workflows that use multiple pieces of software, but you can use AI in between. So if you're trying to get more advanced and you're wanting to like really get technical, it's very cheap. And I'm not somebody who can code, and it's a really good visual platform that I enjoy. It's easy for me to use. So I would use Make.com if you want to get a little more advanced. But honestly, the one thing I would just tell you to do is pay for GPT. Is it Plus or Pro? I'm going to make myself sound like a noob. Do you know what it is? GPT Plus, I think it is. If that's wrong, forgive me. And I would experiment as much as possible. You can try the free version. I think the $20 a month is really worth it. And there's ways to get you access to it if that's a problem. I think we'll call it there. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your questions. I will be outside if you would like to discuss more one-on-one. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Logan, and thank you as well, Dara. That was an awesome session, and I might have thought you were AI too if I didn't see you drink water. No, you're just so knowledgeable, so I appreciate you for sharing with us, and I hope you guys had some great takeaways. So with that, our next speaker in this room will be Maya Prince. That's going to be at 3 o'clock, and Maya is the founder of Koya Protein Beverage. So feel free to check out the tables up front. Also downstairs, there is the interactive RV, and even I saw that the Del Star VR mobile gaming unit is upstairs as well. So there's plenty to do. Enjoy yourselves, network. We hope to see you guys back in here at 3 o'clock for the next speaker. Again, thank you so much, Logan and Dara, for your time today. Thank you.